Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sarah, and I am so honored to be joined today by author Carter Wilson. Carter, how are you?
Sarah, I'm great. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. For those of you who are not familiar with Carter, I'll tell you a little bit more about him. He is the USA Today bestselling author of 9 critically acclaimed standalone psychological thrillers, soon to be 10. We'll talk about that in a second. He is an ITW Thriller Award finalist, a 5-time winner of the Colorado Book Award, and his works have been optioned for TV and film. Carter lives outside of Boulder, Colorado. Dynamic and compelling, he now hosts his own podcast, Making It Up, interviewing authors like S.A. Cosby, Daniel Handler, and of course my favorite, Stuart Turton, and Xio Axelrod, Julie Clark to talk shop and riff on an original story live. I also wanted to ask you more about that, so we'll do that. But the result is a charming and authentic peek into the writing process. So Carter, welcome. Happy to have you here.
Thank you, and I'm glad to know Stu is one of your favorites. He's a good guy. He's hysterical.
He is, and yeah, his books are real page turners. Anyway,
Yeah.
You have an amazing book coming out. Tell me what you did. This is going to come out on January 28th, so we've got 8 days to go at the time of
Yep.
this recording. And I wanted to just dive in by giving the synopsis of the book. So Poe Webb is the main character and host of a popular true crime podcast. And she invites people to anonymously confess crimes they've committed to her audience. And she can't guarantee the police won't come after her guests, but her show grants simultaneous anonymity and instant fame, a potent combination that's proven difficult to resist. After an episode recording, Poe usually erases both criminal and crime from her mind. But when a strange and oddly familiar man appears on her show, Poe is forced to take a second look. Not only because he claims to be her mother's murderer from years ago, but because Poe knows something no one else does. Her mother's murderer is dead. Poe killed him. So with a synopsis like that, how could you not want to pick up this book? I was immediately like, oh yeah, okay. This is a really great concept. And I wanted to say that you've also sprinkled in QR codes throughout the book. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So and I tend to put multimedia in a lot of my books, mostly just to entertain myself more than anything else. And Poe, as the podcaster, as you kind of mentioned in the synopsis, she does it over like Zoom type of thing, and then she deletes it. But she always actually records her side of the conversation on her iPhone on video, and her guests don't know this. And I was writing these scenes, and I'm like, I want to see what this looks like. And I'd gotten to know this actor, Rebecca Kennedy, a little bit. And so I asked her if she would record a few scenes for me. And she did. I'm like, all right, I got to figure out how to put these scenes in the book. So through the use of QR codes, now after you read a certain scene, you can then go watch that same scene with Rebecca playing Poe. And it just tickled me to sprinkle those in there.
I think that is such a cool thing to add. I mean, that multimedia aspect of thrillers I think it's still kind of a new concept, and there are other authors who are doing different types of interactive concepts here. But I love this because it really brings the reader in fully and really immerses you into the storyline.
Oh, good.
So I was just thrilled to be able to watch. And then the concept of a true crime podcast that invites anonymous confessions is really chilling and fascinating. How did you come up with the idea for this premise? Were there real life inspirations?
Yeah, there was actually. I have a buddy, Blake, and he and I used to kind of exchange podcast recommendations. Hey, did you hear this? Did you hear that? And he told me about this podcast, and of course I don't remember the name anymore, and I never listened to it, but he's like, it's a podcast where you can call this voicemail and leave an apology. And they play these apologies, and I'm like, that's amazing. And I thought, well, what if it was a confession instead of an apology? And then when that hit my brain, I'm like, all right, I'm writing about this, so I'm not going to listen to the show. I don't want to be tainted. And so that was kind of just the initial idea. And I don't outline, so all I knew was just this general idea.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. Now, Poe is a really layered and I think very morally gray
Mhm,
character.
mhm.
So she deals with trauma and secrets and justice. With a protagonist like Poe, was there any inspiration for her, or what inspired Poe?
You know, I don't really get inspiration a lot from real life events or real life people from my protagonists, but when you mentioned morally gray, and that was very intentional, and most of my characters are like that because I think most of us are all morally gray, however you want to define that.
Yeah,
And you know, I speak about this a lot, but I find heroic heroes and villainous villains to be very boring
yeah,
because they're just so black and white, and the writing dictates to you how you're supposed to feel about them, and I want the reader to not maybe know how they feel about my characters. So when I'm writing a character, I'm all constantly thinking, well, what would I do in this situation? And you know, I have, you know, about 50% more courage and about 20% more fear, and then that's the answer.
yeah.
But it's never, you can never rely on them to do what the right thing is because they don't know how to define that, and no one knows how to define that. So morally gray is the best compliment you can give that character.
I also wanted to mention for anyone again who's new to Carter's writing, your novels are all standalone. However, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but do they all take place in the same world? You have a strong sense of world building that you've created with a lot of these stories. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, a lot of them have some kind of tie-ins to other novels. I mean, ten novels, all standalones. There are a few that are just completely in their own universe. And there's some that are set in the same fictitious town, some that
Yeah,
are set in the same region of the country. In the case of Tell Me What You Did, I have a character from my fifth book, Mr. Tinder's Girl, you know, make a pretty pronounced appearance.
yeah.
References to colleges that other characters went to in other books. So there's a lot of little Easter eggs, and that's just a lot of fun for me. Again, everything I do is to amuse myself. Then hopefully it becomes a book people want to read. But I love the sense that there is a universe that all these characters have some kind of loose connection to one another within.
I love that too. With the Easter eggs, is it hard to keep track, or like how do you keep track of those little mentions here and there?
I don't. I
Okay.
I'll put something in there, and then you know, if it's something that's incorrect, yeah, I'm sure my agent or my editor or copy editor picks up on it. Um, but there might, you know, there'll be small things. There'll be like a character who just throws on a sweatshirt, and it's the college name of a fictitious college the
Yeah.
character went to in my third book. And just small little things like that. Nobody's going to catch it, but again, it entertains me.
When you are putting together a thriller, I feel like there's, of course, a lot of pressure for authors. There sometimes, to be frank, like sometimes there's a lot of thrillers out there, and some of them are really, they're boring. They're redundant. They're not fresh and new. And I feel like with the addition of multimedia that you've added to yours, as well as some of the world building too, it really keeps things fresh. Do you feel a lot of pressure as a thriller writer to make sure that you're always, coming up with something that is really, really just different?
Yeah, it's hard to gauge, right? Like
Yeah,
you know, my ideas come from many different places, and so let's use the example of Tell Me What You Did. My friend told me about that podcast, and then me having that thought about it being a confession. If I have a visceral kind of reaction to that, which doesn't
yeah,
happen very often, or if I read an article that's got something in there that I have this reaction to, I know that that's interesting, and that's me. Because you think about it, there's a lot of thrillers about podcasts, and I knew that going in. I'm like, this has been done, but I didn't care because I just was so interested in the take on it. So it's really about trusting
100%.
your instinct as a writer, and not thinking about the market so much. And then if you do that, I think you'll have success.
Yeah.
But it does require it requires faith, it requires imagination, and it requires a lot of excitement on your part, the writer. And if you're excited about it, hopefully that means other people will be as well.
I think that the creativity that you have, that just as a person and as an author, really comes through with most things that you do.
Mm.
The angle for the book is very fresh and very exciting. And also with you have a podcast, and the activity that you do toward the end of each episode, where you do a little creative story activity. It's not really an
Yeah,
activity.
like the
It's
improv.
brilliant. Yeah, it's improv, and it's really, especially, I watched a couple of episodes on YouTube, and I think it's more fun to really watch like the expressions
The
on
faces,
on
yeah.
your
Nothing's cut
um
out.
yeah. Where did you get that idea to, or just what inspired the creative writing activity toward the end?
Yeah, I honestly don't quite remember. I think I had done that before on some
Yeah.
interview years ago, and I must have just remembered that. But I was kind of thinking about, what you want your podcast to be a little different, obviously, and but not to be forcibly different. So my take on my podcast is it's just a deep dive interview with authors, which isn't necessarily original, but I don't have questions in advance. We don't talk about their books rarely. But then I did that, just kind of occurred to me. I'm like, oh, what if we did this? And what's so great about the storytelling is it's the great equalizer, because I might have a poet, I might have a nature journalist, I might have a New York Times bestselling fiction author. They're all having to do this harrowing exercise with me.
Yeah.
And it's just, you get these moments where you get these mind melds with your guests, and you're like, we are on the same level. We are on the same frequency here. And other times it's just a complete mess. And that's fun too.
Absolutely. With Tell Me What You Did, there's a lot of that theme of anonymity versus exposure is
Mhm.
really central to the book. And in your view, this is something that everyone, especially readers, really gravitate to. Why do people crave that anonymity yet simultaneously seek fame,
Yeah.
even in situations involving crime?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I was thinking about it, I was thinking it was kind of a microcosm of society, in the sense of,
Yeah.
people want to be left alone, but people want their 15 minutes, just like you said. And
Yeah.
my perception is most people, depending on your demographic, will be willing to trade that anonymity for a little bit of fame.
Yeah.
And the question is, where's that balance? So Poe, the protagonist, certainly expects people to come on and just lie, just make up stories, just to get the fame, and that's her job to kind of root them out. And
Yeah.
so,
Cut through that.
and if she doesn't believe them, they don't air that episode. Um, and I think most people are willing to take a risk that they'll be safe, and they'll still get their voices on the show, and they get to brag about it, even if they're making up the story or not. It just feels very 21st century America to me.
It really does. It really does. When you're writing a thriller, how are you keeping track of like your little plot twists and, just is it a spreadsheet? Like, how are you working the mechanics of putting a thriller together?
I don't. I mean, and I don't want to be flippant about it, but I
Yeah.
don't. I don't outline. I start with an opening chapter, and that's all I know. And then I'm just constantly thinking, what would I do, and what happens next, and what if this happened? And then it just starts coming out of me, and then maybe about 40,000 words in, I'll go back and I'll read what I've written for the first time,
Yeah.
mostly just to remember what I've written. And then I'll read
Right.
the second half of the book, and just knowing that it's all kind of coming out of my subconsciousness, and it's going to be a mess. And then
Yeah.
when I start to edit, then I start to say, okay, here are the weapons that she's already spotted. Here's what
Right.
she was wearing in this scene. And I'll slowly keep note of things that just feel inconsistent.
Hmm.
Um, but to me, the key is getting that first draft just done without even thinking too much about it, just going with it. And then hopefully it's good enough that you don't have to rewrite the whole thing, but it does come alive in the editing.
Love that. When you have like beta readers, or if you have your editors, how much of their input maybe I don't want to say changes, but how much of that
Mhm.
input really affects the story overall?
A lot of it. I'm very selective about who sees my stuff.
Yeah.
And so now I write something and what I just finished, my agent doesn't even know what it's about. So I keep things very close to the
Yeah.
vest until I'm ready to share because it changes. So I don't know what it's about
Yeah.
necessarily. My partner's the first to read my completed manuscript, then it goes to my agent. She gives me great feedback, which I incorporate or we discuss. And then it goes to my editor who, you go through these pretty serious rounds of
Right.
editing with the publisher. And I mean, I can't think of more than 3 or 4 instances that I've declined to do something. And if I do decline to do something, it's exceptionally minor. Because you read all these comments from these people who are your partners and who
Yeah.
are entrenched in the industry and they know how to sell books. And you read these
Yeah.
comments like, of course, this is going to make my book better. So I never finish a writing and think like, this is great. I think I'm happy with this where it is now. And I can't wait to get great feedback to make this even better because you can't do it all alone. It's hard. It's hard to think
It
of
is.
instances that you get too close to it to see the flaws.
That's true. Now, with your career and also you teach and offer workshops for writers as well, which I really loved. And what I found exciting is that you emphasize for writers building their confidence and helping them find again community, inspiration, motivation. But it's that confidence, and that hit me so much because I have
Mm,
so many friends who are amateur writers who have not yet published anything or shown their work to anyone outside of
right.
their family, and it breaks my heart,
Right.
because they work so hard and it's such a big part of them. Tell me more about the workshops as well.
Yeah, I wanted to teach. I love teaching. I love talking to other writers.
Yeah.
And, after 20 plus years doing this, you've learned the few things you think. And I'm all self-taught. I had no background in this. So I feel like because I've gone through all the slings and arrows, I maybe have a few things to teach. But I don't believe in the idea of like, hey, here's how you write a thriller. That's BS to me. There's a million ways to write a thriller. I could tell you how
Yeah.
I do it, and maybe you can get some information. But I love talking about the psychology of writing. That's so important to me because I've been through all of
Yes.
that. And so with all of my students, the very first thing we work on before we go anywhere is like, hey, what's your why? Why are you doing this? Why do you want to write? Why are you writing? And no one gets off the hook easily with that question. No, because I really make them explore it. So in your point, you say it breaks your heart, right? That somebody,
Yeah.
if their why is to just release creativity and keep it to themselves, then it's not heartbreaking at all. They've
Yeah.
achieved. If their goal is to publish and they're not showing it to anyone, that is heartbreaking. So we get to like, why are you doing this? And then we start building on like, okay, what are your blocks? Because somebody tells me they have writer's block and I call them out. I'm like, there's no such thing. There's a block that might be keeping you from writing, but it's not writer's block. There's something going on, fear of success, fear of failure, whatever it is, there's something there. So I love to explore that because again, I've been through all of that myself.
I love that. In my day job, I teach branding and marketing to
Oh,
entrepreneurs.
great.
And I find that really the things that hold us back from being successful are just, of course, getting out of our own way. But, those blocks of, not being good enough or not feeling like you have a community that you can, rely on to
Yeah,
support you.
community is huge for writers, and people don't think
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You picture the writer kind of being the solitary creature, and for a lot
Yeah.
of our lives that it is, but networking, conferences, being able to call somebody up and say, "Hey, can we share notes on our hunt for an agent? Because I don't know if I'm doing it right." Like, and you will find there's so many people just like you going through the exact same thing. And I can't tell you how important that is to find that community and to stay close and be proactive with it.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump back to talking about your podcast, Making It Up, which I'll
Sure.
link in the show notes so that people can check it out because it's really, really fun.
Thank you.
Um, did you have a favorite or surprising story that you put together with another writer during one of the episodes?
Well, I don't remember a lot of the stories themselves. I remember
Like how it made you feel, like if it was an
Yeah.
absolute
I remember
cluster. Yeah.
talking to Mark Sullivan, who's a big name, and like I was
Mhm.
talking to him, and I was a little intimidated because he's just kind of an intimidating guy. Um, but then he just kind of started becoming extremely vulnerable in our conversation because we got deep into some stuff, and we got to the storytelling, and that was a mind meld. That was where like he just flowed with his words like you were reading him. It was that well structured, and then that allowed me to be good as well. And I just remember afterwards, like that was the best. I couldn't even tell you what the story was now. And
Right.
again, these are 3 minutes long.
Yeah.
But I just remember feeling like that was amazing. That was this weird energy that like it just like we should co-write together.
I was gonna say, like, I wonder if this has inspired like any collaborations for the future, potentially.
Sometimes we get some stories. I'm like, I could see that. I would read that book.
Absolutely. Um, what is one piece of advice or insight from your guests that you've had on your podcast that really maybe influenced or changed how you approach writing?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I do feel like I've learned a lot from my guests. I've also feel like it's almost like I have reinforced
Yeah.
instinctual things by
Yeah.
talking to other writers.
Yeah.
And so many writers on my podcast have said, this is trite and cliche, but it's true, is write every day. And that's one of my major tenets of, is like talent is part of it. Yes.
Sure.
But it's about the muscle. It's about the commitment. And it's about, looking at writing as a career and not a hobby. And it's giving it respect that you would give to a career, even if you're not making any money from it. And I
Yeah.
hear this time and time again from my guests, and it's what I adhere to. And it is so important because so much of anything is showing up. And so many aspiring writers, they wait for the muse, and then they have this crazy all night writing session, and it's fabulous. And then they don't touch it for another 4 weeks or whatever. And that doesn't get it done. It's every day. And some days it's miserable. Some days it's data entry.
Or garbage. Yeah. It
Like
just,
the career is, like any job is.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to hear those things that then kind of confirm your natural instincts or what you've been experiencing all
Oh,
along.
absolutely. Awesome. Now I wanted to ask you about your favorite books and what books in your life or career have really shaped, or inspired you.
That's a good question. A little bit of everything. And honestly, I'm a big nonfiction reader.
Oh, really?
I tend to mostly read nonfiction.
Okay.
I love a great memoir. I love a good historical story. I just read The Wager, which is about a shipwreck in the 18th century off of Patagonia,
Yeah.
and I'm riveted by it. There's certain writers that you just stop and just start like read that page again. Like, why are they forcing me to read every word? How do they do that? Cormac McCarthy is a great example.
Yeah.
I could never emulate or write like Cormac McCarthy, but I read Cormac McCarthy, and sometimes it's a task. Sometimes it's just purely sublime. Like I just
Mhm.
sit there like, how did he? I don't even know what this word means, but it's making me feel something.
Yeah.
I'll read anything Stephen King puts out. I don't like all of it, but I like most of it. And just
Yeah.
his ability to develop characters from an emotional standpoint, I think
Yeah.
always kind of connects with me a little bit. So it's a little bit of everything. And same goes to watching TV. Like there's shows that I watch that I'll rewind. I'm like, why do I care about this person so much? How did the writers do that? What are the tricks here?
Yeah. Oh man. Well, Carter, those are all the questions I have for you today. I just wanted to wrap up by asking if there was anything that you wanted to share about where they should perhaps, like what helps you out with if someone wants to pre-order the book before it's out. Is there a specific place, Amazon or where, anything like that?
Anywhere is fine. Wherever you like to buy your books, that's great. with me, you can see all the links at my website at carterwilson.com. And yeah, if there are aspiring writers out there that want to check out my offerings for coaching, that's just all at unboundwriter.com.
Awesome. And I'll share all those links. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was so fun. And again, I really encourage everybody to check out Making It Up, which is Carter's podcast as well. I mean, of course, go get the book, but the podcast is really fun too. So thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks, Sarah. What a pleasure talking to you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.